Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast. It is day 28. It's the 10th of October. We're down to it, man. It's happening. It's happening. But here's the deal. Today I woke up to so much, and it's troll behavior, shit posting, whatever you want to call it. I woke up to nonsense. And the thing is these people, it's funny because I think his name's Ryan Walters. He's the guy whose wife almost died in Texas, and he came on strong onto social media talking about what happened in Texas. And he's been a staunch advocate for women's health care since this horrible thing happened to their family. Well, he posted that he woke up to a ton of shit posts as well. And the thing is that the people who are doing it, and if you don't get to see it, you're lucky. If you do see it, you'll know most of them have about 100 followers, sometimes less, sometimes more, but right around that number. They generally have a weird ass name. We have all known about this. So that is familiar to everybody where we know that they have a name, but the numbers after it, or you go look at their actual moniker, the at thing, it's even worse. So they have like a bold name, a moniker, and then their handle. So those two things, they don't have any initial tweet. They don't tweet anything themselves. They don't have any independent thoughts because they're part of the bot farm, right? And they mostly they're just rude. They're just say vile things. And that's the part that I think is most disappointing for those of us that are still on Twitter. And I'm going to probably go down with the ship because I've been on Twitter since it first started, like in 2008. It was great. And I was early in social media because I worked in social media from the very beginning. It's like I taught one of the first classes on the Macintosh at Fort Mason in San Francisco because I got the technology really quickly and I could translate it for people who wanted to learn how to use it. So same thing with these shit posters. They don't add a value, but they're just so rude. They come at you so hard and it gets you down. And so I today they were going after, there was a question someone asked on a kind of a popular thread. And they were saying, how is it that nobody can remember how bad it was during the Trump era? That's the big question, right? How come you can't remember how bad it was, like from 2016 to 2020 in particular? That seems to be a bit of a blank hole, a blank space for a lot of us. We were coping, we were getting through things, stuff was happening. There was a lot happening. It was chaos like we'd never experienced chaos before. I got to give it to Trump. Bigly chaos, bigly confusion, bigly jackassery. Like there was a lot going on. But here's the deal. So when I posted that the way trauma happens to us is it gets written to a different part of our brain than a memory. So I believe my hypothesis is, and it turns out I think I'm right on the right track, is that when you are traumatized, and you can be traumatized for any reason, it doesn't mean that Trump traumatized you, but it means that you might be in a state of heightened anxiety. Or like me, I was going through the Golden State Killer trial during those years. That was a big part of my life, and I never expected it. I also I went through a lot of employment changes during those years that were happening somewhat related to what was going on with the trial. So there was a lot happening. But for many people, there's all kinds of, you're living your life. You're a real human being. You may have trauma in your body from your childhood. You may have trauma in your body from being a teenager and having stuff happen to you. You never know. Everybody comes to life. I'm really deciding that we all come in and we're all a bit of a wounded soldier. Like we all just have baggage, right? We all know that life's a hot mess. And I don't know, some kind of rose-colored glasses made us think it was better than it is. But right now, life is pretty messy. So the deal is that if you were a person with trauma, there's a good chance that you may have written memories differently. You may have written information to your brain in a different way. And I'm going to take you through that. And then I'm going to share some studies with you that validate this point of view. Because first of all, nobody gets to tell someone else they don't have trauma. That's just a bullshit thing. That's just being an ass. If you see someone and they say they've been traumatized, time out. Okay, just take it at its face value. You don't know what that means, and your experiences are not the same as other people's experiences. So can we just honor trauma? I don't care if you don't like it. I don't care if you think it's a ruse. I don't care. Just gonna have to live with it. Just like, some people are fat and some people are thin. It's just true. So everybody's been on their own path and their own journey. And we all bring baggage from it. And we all may have different things that get us upset and bring back feelings that we don't like to have. And really, That's what trauma is feelings, not necessarily memories. That's so important because that's why there's a difference. And that's why there's so many anti-anxiety drugs, right? Because we have physiological feelings inside of us. This is me, my hands are going up and down if you're watching video, but that's it. It's inside of our bodies. And if you feel uncomfortable, that's one thing. But if you feel anxious, like your skin, I think it's called with an M, formication. It's when it feels like you have bugs crawling inside your skin. I believe that's what it's called. I've had that before with anxiety. I've had relentless crying, like no resilience, which I talked about resilience a couple of days ago. I've had things catch me completely off guard, like where I can't get a thought to come forward because the feelings, I'm going to say the back of my head, but the feelings have taken over and I can't get the thought out of my mouth because my front brain has been disrupted by my back brain. Not sure that's exactly where everything is, but that's how I speak about it. So let me go through what I've prepared for you today. And I'd like to know if this resonates for you. Please give me feedback. It's really helpful. Some people are finally taking me up on my request to please give me some feedback. I really appreciate that. One person said I ramble too much. Completely true. If you're listening to this podcast and you expect no rambling, you're going to need to go get one of the professional podcasts. Sorry. This one's free and you're getting it free and you're getting exactly what you paid for. So, okay, let's talk about this trauma and where it writes. If you haven't heard this before, it's really good stuff. It's very good stuff. If you haven't heard it before, I might just remind you. And so you can use this to, I would like to see us all use this to give each other much more grace. I believe that the gift of grace is huge and massive, and you don't have to be religious to give someone grace. Grace just means you give other people space and permission to not be perfect, which is a big gift. It's a huge gift. So here we go. In recent years, most of us have had an almost visceral impact of living through the Trump presidency. It's the chaotic political landscape coupled with the intensity of national crises from COVID-19 to social and political unrest. And the emotional and mental scars are real for millions. Like millions of people people were deported. Sorry, don't mean to keep saying like Chris Hayes. People have been deported during that time. People died during that time. There was Black Lives Matter and lots of protests and unfair things and violence and just tons of stuff went on during those Trump years, right? As the next election looms, experts have noticed an unusual phenomenon, and they call it Trump presidency amnesia. According to a recent article in Mother Jones, this collective forgetting is partly due to how human memory operates under prolonged stress and trauma. I do think I have that link to that story because I read it. I'm just checking my browser, but I'm pretty sure I have that link. So it'll be linked in here if you want to read that Mother Jones article. Here's how our collective Trump memories are studied. Memory experts argue that our minds tend to suppress painful or overwhelming memories by compartmentalizing them to shield us from the distress. So you have a memory, like, oh, I have a bad memory. I have a memory of a man who burned himself alive. It's definitely a memory. I think I've managed to move it from feelings to memory. He did it. Katie was in a tutoring session. I was outside. He did it because he was distraught over his girlfriend. He died. But I heard it. I didn't see it. Thank God I did not see it. But I heard it. And I got to tell you, hearing it might be right up there with seeing it. Like oof. So I have a hard time watching any kind of burning human videos. But I believe I've moved what used to be a really gross feeling, like almost kind of throw up-y feeling about it because it was just that awful. I think I've managed to move it to a memory. Like I don't have, you can see, I can talk about it. And I'm not having a lot of feeling. I have a little tiny bit of feelings, but not really. Mostly I just remember it now as a thing that happened. That was a tragedy that I had the misfortune of being in the wrong place. Katie didn't hear it, thank God, in her tutoring session. So our experts argue that our minds tend to suppress the painful or overwhelming memories by compartmentalizing them to shield us from the distress. This amnesia, that's what they're calling it, may also be influenced by how narratives are shaped and repeated in political discourse. See, it can also be not serving us because we can potentially forget stuff we shouldn't forget. For example, a psychology professor at the New School for Social Research, William Hirsch, explains that repetition of selective positive memories can reinforce a collective memory. Like if we all remember something really good, we do this all the time. I have a friend who's Creole, their whole family, all they do is sit around and talk about collective positive memories. It really builds a culture in their family. Like it's almost, it's not a mythology, but there's this culture based on these shared memories. Luckily, I'm able to dip in and out of them because I grew up with them my whole life, but I haven't spent as much time with them for sure since I was in my 20s and 30s. And yet I still can participate in their family culture. It served this collective memory, and it fades the negative aspects from the mind's forefront. It's a really positive thing, right? Don't remember mom dying as much as you remember when mom spilt the gumbo all over the floor. Like, whatever. I made that up. Marjorie would never have spilt the gumbo all over the floor. She knew what was important. um, Psychiatrist George Macari and Richard Friedman argue in the New England. Let's try this again. Yeah. Psychiatrists George Macari and Richard Friedman argue in the New England Journal of Medicine that the pandemic's collective trauma and the social discord surrounding it. Remember, we didn't have a way to understand it either. We were cut off. We couldn't see people. We didn't get to practice our norms in grieving and in saying goodbye. Everything was wonky. And y'all were banging pots in New York City at 8 o'clock every night, which, by the way, was really cool. That was super, super cool. But I'm just saying, dystopian much? Yeah, totally. So the social discord surrounding it has left a mental fog in its wake. So if it feels foggy, it's legit. You're not alone. It's legit. There's a lot of mental fog people have. People may actively suppress memories of uncertainty, isolation, and fear associated with that time. And this selective memory or amnesia can benefit politicians like Trump, who leverage it by avoiding mention of painful events such as the January 6th attack or the pandemic mismanagement, in favor of turning to nostalgia inducing rhetoric. And the point here is really that he goes back to the good old days. How were you 4 years ago? Blah, 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 blah. It's a great question to ask, how are you doing 4 years ago? You know why? Many of us have fog, total brain fog about it. So he's kind of safe asking. You'd think it would threaten him, but it doesn't, because he screwed us over so hard. A lot of us with good minds don't remember. Oh. So the trauma and memories are stored differently in our brain, and understanding this difference is crucial for understanding how the trauma affects our emotions, behaviors, and our well-being. So here we go. Here's what happens. I always think of my brain like a giant filing cabinet. I don't know what metaphor you use, but I know that my data tends to get filed in folders where I already have existing data, right? That's just like an information structure. It appends to what already exists. So if I'm learning, they say if you think about something 7 times in a row, the 7th thought will be a brand new thought that you've never had before. That's how I think of my brain. Like I learned something new about cats, it goes in the cat folder, unless it's about how cats eat, and then it might go in the nutrition folder. I'm not sure. It depends. But you append new knowledge to knowledge that you already have. That's how you can learn faster and better. It's a great way to teach, especially if you've got kids. It's like take something they know and now add to it, add to it. They'll learn so much faster. So based on that, ordinary memories, particularly declarative and conscious memories, think of them as facts and events, like hardcore things you can point to or see, spilling the gumbo on the floor. That would be a hardcore conscious fact and event. It happened. They're mainly processed in the hippocampus, which is, I think, in the middle somewhere. So it's in there. Trust me, you have one. The hippocampus organizes and contextualizes the memories. The hippocampus is your file manager. It's your admin. It's the person who's like going, oh, that goes over here and that goes over there, and let's cross connect those because we're going to need to access those later. That's what's happening in the hippocampus. It allows us to recall information and experience with clear context and details. The part of the brain works closely with the prefrontal cortex, which helps us logically process memories, right? So up here we know is our executive functioning, and that's what helps us keep things ordered and like, oh my God, I got to eat, and oh, did I actually, it's the part that kind of runs, it's management. The frontal cortex is management, and the hippocampus is traffic. They're trying to figure out where things belong and how we want to put things and where we want to put them. And in marketing, we call that a traffic manager. They know where things are supposed to go, and they check on things that are late and all that. This part of the brain, the hippocampus, with the part of the brain works closely with the prefrontal cortex. So it's the management layer, which helps us logically process this stuff and place them in sequence and make sense of their significance, right? Our mind files and catalogs trauma differently. When a traumatic event occurs, the brain's processing changes dramatically. This is the key right here, guys. It's not the hippocampus and the manager and the traffic manager all doing their jobs. There's trauma involved. You're scared. Something's happening. Trauma impacts areas like the amygdala and the hippocampus, both critical for emotional and memory processing. So the amygdala is the part of the brain responsible for that fight, flight, freeze, and there's one more F, fawn. The flight, fright, freeze, flight, can't say it, Invisalign screwed. The fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response is what, oh, crap, every woman knows, because if you've watched any Law and Order show in the world where they say the rape victim didn't say anything, first of all, screw you. It's not a time to talk. When you're a rape victim, you're coping, you're trying to survive, so screw you. But more important, that you have these responses of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, because and fawn really just means you just instantly suck up to them because you're terrified. You basically beg for your life, that kind of feeling. Those are the 4 responses that happen. During the trauma, the amygdala is hyperactivated. So it knows something bad is happening, and it stores the intense emotional impressions and sensory details. Okay, this is really important because we're going to talk about cognitive interviews on Criminal Minds, right? The amygdala is storing intense emotional impressions, sensory details like sounds, smells, or sights, rather than an organized narrative. This is groundbreaking in assault crimes and in personal injury crimes and all of those. They talk a lot. Criminal Minds talks about it a lot. I think SVU talks about this. It's now day or good practice to do cognitive interviews. And if you look at what you're listening for in a cognitive interview, you're listening for the sensory details. Those are your 5 senses, right? Sight, sound, taste, touch, and there's one more. Why can I not remember it right now? Hear, speak, whatever. The 5 senses, how we know the world. There's 5 senses. I just can't remember them all. Anyway, the key about those is that when you take things in, sensory data is getting written to the amygdala. That right now, your sensory data, which is why a cognitive interview asks you to close your eyes or to go back to the place and to experience it and try to do a 360 experience. It's almost like meditating in the space, because what you want to remember is if there was a smell. You want to remember if the skin was rough. You want to remember if you heard a train in the distance, or if the person hurting you cried. You want to remember that smell of motor oil and bad tequila. Like, those are the things you want to remember, and that's a cognitive interview. That's coming from your amygdala. It's where the trauma is living. This emotional encoding, that's what's happened in your amygdala, is why the trauma memories can feel visceral and intense even years later, and why triggers can instantly cause an emotional and physical reaction. So when you say, I got triggered, when you hear someone say, I got triggered, it means they have feelings. And it usually means, I have feelings I don't want. Mostly, I probably feel anxious, maybe barfy, maybe my head's roaring. Maybe I can't actually even discern anymore. It really depends on the intensity of the trauma. And that's really important. And it's why when somebody says they're experiencing trauma, you want to slow down and understand what's going on. Because this can be a completely sliding scale, guys. You can come in at trauma at any point, right? So you don't want to ever discount someone's trauma. It's real. And the problem is, it's an emotional and a physical reaction. It's visceral. You're feeling it in your bones. You feel it in your body. And it can be very intense. Sometimes it's not so bad. It's weird. Yesterday, just for some reason, I started remembering my mom actually dying, and I had to be there for it. And we're not going to talk about it now because it ruins me. But I saw things I don't want to ever see again, and unfortunately got written to my amygdala. And so it comes on strong. I know I'll eventually go get that moved to a memory, but right now it's still raw because it's only a few months ago. And I know that, and it happens. My amygdala and my triggering happens a lot easier when my resilience is down, is what I talked about resilience a couple of days ago. You need to know about that. When your resilience is down, you're much more likely to be triggered. So there's your amygdala working like hell to save you from remembering that stuff as a memory and allowing you to remember that stuff as something that you need to deal with. Thank you, amygdala. The hippocampus can be impaired. Trauma can impair the hippocampus, making it harder to store the experience as an ordinary memory. So here you have something triggering for you, or something that's an abuse, something that's making you so afraid. And your hippocampus won't freaking cooperate. It's like the manager in charge of the traffic manager just goes, no, this is too hard for me. I'm not going to do it. So when that happens, trauma memories can feel fragmented because your hippocampus is like, hell no, not writing that to the hard drive. You go deal over that. You go deal with that over there in triage. Do not bring that to me to deal with in the hard drive. Things will feel fragmented, out of sequence, or like they're happening in the moment rather than the past. Because the hippocampus is less involved, the brain doesn't organize the trauma into a complete timestamped memory like other experiences. And every freaking jury who has to hear from a traumatized victim has to know this. It doesn't come out like a story. In fact, what's interesting, and here's some of this rambling, right? It's interesting. I watched that Monsters movie about the Menendez brothers, and I've watched all of the crap about Menendez brothers, true crimes. People like me, we watch all the crap. But what I thought was interesting about the one Ryan, what's his name, Ryan Murphy or something like that. What I find interesting about it, it's not, I don't know if it's well written or not, but I know that it was put together as a good story. And also they approached it in this way. They approached it from trauma. The story is not one continuous, nice, tied up with the bow story. You're getting everybody's trauma response. Because if you think about it, Leslie Aronson even had a trauma response. There's so many trauma responses happening, and they kind of wrote the story that way. So it's hard to know what the truth is because our brains don't even record it properly. So the difference matters because this difference between the amygdala and the hippocampus matters because our brain can be a bad secretary, right? The way trauma stores affects how we experience it and process it later. And trauma memories are often less accessible to our conscious memory and more likely to be triggered by sensory cues or emotional states. Welcome to my freaking world. Because the hippocampus hasn't fully organized them, trauma memories can resurface as intense emotions or physical sensations without a clear narrative. Do you get that? You can just feel like crap is what that says. You could just be confused and feel bad and not know why, because it's not necessarily written as a story in your brain. It's just feels. And sometimes I just know when I have the feels. And sometimes I have the feels in their mind, and sometimes I have the feels on behalf of someone else because I'm worrying about them. And I don't even know it. I don't even know it's entered into me in that way. All this lack of narrative context can lead to flashbacks, hypervigilance, avoidance behaviors, and common conditions like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is really when all the bad things in your amygdala rise up and say, screw you, you're dealing with me now. Yeah, that's how it works. But your feelings are just yelling at you. Understanding the difference here between the amygdala and the hippocampus and how stuff gets written and the feels versus the concrete evidence, facts, and things that you know, is where therapy can make a difference. And there are techniques like trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's learning how to reframe things that happened to you, reframe them in more. This was a big one for me. Since I was a suspect in my dad's murder, I felt like a piece of human garbage for decades, for more than a decade. I still feel pretty bad about it, but I really felt actively pretty damn bad for about a decade. Finally, a therapist used CBT to help reframe it and said, did you ever think, Jen, that maybe your dad treated you so badly that people thought, well, shit, she has a reason to want to kill him? Well, Menendez-y, right? No, I never thought that before. It doesn't, I still don't like it. I do not like people like that people thought that about me. It makes me really feel bad about myself. But at least I was able to move it from being something that I was internalizing mostly, I'm going to wince a little bit, and set it aside through cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's like reframing. And then there's something called EMDR. And I have done EMDR. I call it the hand them a fork method. It's essentially when somebody's tripping. This is really good for somebody that has obsessive thoughts. They're tripping and telling you all the reasons. And you go, oh, could you hand me a fork? Swear to God, that's like an EMDR. It's not, there's a lot more to therapy, but the idea is when you start perseverating, the can you hand me a fork is the idea is that you get the person with the obsessive thoughts, right? You got to break through those obsessive thoughts. It's not a bad thing to do if you have somebody who's actually hyperventilating or having a hard time just losing it. And the key to this, can you hand me a fork? It has to be something that is, it has to have something that has see, touch, feel. Your five senses can react to it. So the deal with handing a fork is that the person has to actually touch a fork, which grounds them. That's why we tell people go outside and put your feet on grass, right? Grass is an amazingly grounding, a terribly good way to ground yourself, is what I was going to say. It's a weird sentence, but the idea is if you say to hand me a fork, they have to like look at a fork, touch the fork, and move the fork. That can be enough to break the obsessive thinking. EMDR is a lot more than that, but it's that kind of way of thinking, is how to disrupt and then start to break these things down so we can put them in the hippocampus where they belong and take them out of the amygdala. The last one is brain spotting, which I've talked about before. I put a link to my blog about it. A lot of people did brain spotting that were part of the group from the Golden State Killer. So if you're interested in brain spotting, I have that too. But all of these cognitive behavior methodologies, these therapies, help the brain process the trauma more fully, and it allows the hippocampus to contextualize it, right? So you just had, it's like my office that you can't see. There's just crap everywhere. And basically what you're doing with these kinds of cognitive-based therapies is starting to put things away and put them where they belong. So you don't have to carry them with you like open wounds. These kinds of therapies are very, very good. And a lot of people do them now. So if you have trauma, I really recommend looking into them. And they don't have to be that expensive. I believe you can get EMDR people who are good at it for a reasonable amount of money. There's some EMDR you can do yourself online, but I'd probably go take my chances and have a couple sessions before you do EMDR on your own, just so you can learn how it's done. It has to do with sound, and it has to do with other things. You want to make sure you get all those parts together. So that when this kind of therapy happens, the reprocessing helps the brain to timestamp the trauma as a past event, reducing its emotional intensity and allowing individuals to respond more flexibly rather than react from a place of past trauma. So now as I try to work through some of these issues, even if I have an emotional response, sometimes I try to really like reframe it in the moment and then feel the feelings and then try to let it become a memory instead of a feeling. I just want to be done with so many feelings, right? Trauma results from highly distressing events that overwhelms a person's ability to cope and process what happened. This is the key right here, guys, because this is how you can see it's on a sliding scale, and it has to do with everybody's ability to cope and process. And if your relatives died because of COVID, or if you're isolated because of a pandemic restriction, or if your friend has been snatched by the government by immigration for no reason other than we're trying to make Stephen Miller happy, that could be a lot to cope with. So everybody's, excuse me, on a sliding scale. These experiences trigger intense emotional and psychological responses and physiological responses as well, profoundly impacting our mental and physical health. I'm going to have the hiccups now. This is great. However, trauma isn't experienced in the same way by everyone. A combination of factors, including genetics, personal history, resilience, and support systems, can influence how people's traumatic events happen, how they process traumatic events. I'm sorry, don't know why I have the hiccups. It's like, of course. Causes of trauma and variability is not predictable. Trauma can stem from a range of events, including abuse, accidents, natural disasters. I mean, all the people who've gone through these two back-to-back hurricanes, holy crap, loss and collective societal events like a pandemic or political instability. Trauma isn't only about the event itself, but how a person experiences and interprets it. For example, while two people might experience the same event, one may develop symptoms of PTSD and the other may not, depending on their mental and emotional resources. And this comes out of a study by the reported on the American Psychological Association. For people who dismiss trauma as drama, every shit poster out there, it may help to explain the science behind trauma's impact on the brain and body. Trauma isn't simply an emotional overreaction. There's a physiological response to disrupt areas like the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex, altering how people process emotions and memories. That's from another study done. This is important because it's not just being a wreck. There's two things. Let me give you this is the easiest way to understand it. Let's say you have panic. Panic hits you for whatever reasons. You have panic and you get the rush of adrenaline and it goes out to every area of your body. That adrenaline just hits you. It squirts out and you are now on alert. You are full adrenaline. Here's what you should know that you may not know. It takes 8 minutes for that adrenaline to subside. You can choose to wait out those 8 minutes if you are capable. That's a big deal. If you can wait out those 8 minutes, you're good. But if you can't, the physiology that happened, that adrenaline that's happened, can trigger more adrenaline and more cycles up and up. That is your physiology. Your brain can't stop it. The only thing your brain can stop is the 8 minutes and say, let's see if I can get this to stop squirting adrenaline into my body by waiting 8 minutes and see if I can calm down and recover. It's a real thing. Real people with anxiety do. They take the 8 minutes to recover. But if the physiology gets ahead of you, this is sometimes why they tell you to take the Xanax before you go to the airport, because we don't even want that adrenaline to start to spike. My therapist called it, don't let the train leave the station, because once your physiological, your autonomic and somatic response system kicks into place, your brain, as hard as you think, it can't stop that. So you want to stop it before it starts if you can. And especially if you get that adrenaline hit, you want to just try to lean into it for 8 minutes. Time it. I want to know if it works for you. It's worked for me. Okay, so trauma in response to political events and the Trump era here's what we've got. There have been studies done on this, and they increasingly document how social and political stressors, including the recent political climate, have impacted our mental health. Research has found that the Trump presidency, marked by divisive rhetoric, policy changes, social unrest, has intensified stress, especially among marginalized groups and people with specific identity backgrounds. Not white MAGA. The American Psychological Association printed Stress in America surveys, and they have consistently reported increased stress linked to political and societal uncertainties since 2016. Yes, this is new. Trump is responsible. It's completely new. Isn't it lovely? It includes violence, so there's that. The survey revealed over 63% of Americans reported feeling stressed about the nation's future, with as many citing political climate, personal safety, and social divisiveness as contributing factors. There's that. The University of Nebraska-Lincoln study found political stress and conflict since the 2016 election contributed to adverse health effects for many Americans, actually making us sick. This study showed that Americans across political identities experienced increased anxiety, hello, adrenaline, loss of sleep, hello, and deterioration of physical health due to political conflict. The Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease published a study that noted that Trump anxiety disorder, with symptoms like worry about our national and global safety and avoidance behaviors, e.g. avoiding news, and relationship tension. Do you still talk to family members? This research underscores that significant political changes in the perceived threat to democratic norms have influenced mental health similarly to traumatic stress. That's huge. That's a 2019 study. That's a big deal that they found that that when we are threatening our democratic norms, the things that, help us live better lives as Americans, when those are threatened, it influences mental health similarly to being traumatically impacted. And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic added a layer of trauma during the Trump administration, with social and political debates over health protocols, vaccine distribution, the free giving of machines to Putin, and misinformation exacerbating the stress was particularly hard on healthcare workers and marginalized communities. Oh yeah, we ran those healthcare workers ragged. We asked them to do things that were inhuman. While Trump was sending those machines to Putin, we had healthcare workers reusing masks because we couldn't get them more masks, because Trump's administration had its head so far up its red, racist. These studies collectively suggest that living in a climate marked by social and political division, especially in times of instability, contribute to trauma and trauma-like responses in many individuals. So here's the deal. If you're feeling traumatized or even anxious because of Trump, it's legit. You have every right. I don't care what all those ninnies and bots say, it's for real. And I can tell because of the number of likes I got on one comment I made about it being stored as trauma and as memories. That one comment I made has gotten so many likes. It's crazy. A lot of us were damaged. You know why? And here's the biggest sucker reason why we were traumatized by Trump. And this is why the shit posters don't matter. The reason we were traumatized by Trump is because we give a shit. That's it. That's the biggest reason you don't feel good about Trump, because you give a shit. You care about America. You care about our democracy. You care about fair, equal. You care about other human beings. You want to lift people up. You don't want other people hurt. And even what's happening at the border, you want that done right. You do not want children taken away from their parents anymore. You do not want anti-abortion to mean that there are children trafficked because of forced births. You don't want women who are grown and here on the planet and breathe and have lives and children and relationships to die because of a draconian law that's written in black and white by two Supreme Court justices in particular who are corrupt as fuck. That's why you have trauma, because you're a normal, healthy, decent human being who gives a shit. And I'm proud to know you, and I'm proud that you're listening to this, and I'm proud that you're reading this. I am super proud to know you. Well, I don't really know you, but you know what I mean? We hang out with the same kind of people. We're creating our collective memory, right? So the people who are experiencing distress as a result are entirely valid and supported by the research. Political and social turmoil can feel traumatic, especially when it disrupts our safety and stability. The phenomenon of Trump presidency amnesia only complicates it further by creating a sense of isolation for those who remember the impact vividly. And I'm sorry for those of you who remember it better than I do, because it's lonely to have be the only one remembering. And I get that. And you shouldn't feel lonely. We're with you. We feel it. We just feel it differently. Experts have shown that the combination of divisive rhetoric, repeated crises, social upheaval during these years has left lasting imprints on our mental health, comparable to the stress responses seen in other traumatic events. As we collectively reflect on these years, remember that feeling impacted by them is not drama. Please do not feel trivialized. We have been through a lot. And it's almost, I mean, Amy Siskin, she was keeping the book of norms that were being destroyed. I think she quit after 1 year because there were so many, just in 1 year, there were so many norms that were destroyed. Trauma doesn't only stem from traditional disasters or personal loss. It can arise from social and political climates that challenge our fundamental sense of security and belonging. And that's absolutely what's been happening. The emotional, psychological, and physiological effects are real, and addressing them openly is crucial for healing. Understanding and validating these experiences paves the way for a more honest public memory, and that helps keep history intact and honors the realities people endured. So there you go. I'm totally serious about this, folks. We need to take care of our collective selves. We need to take care of each other, and we need to be proud of ourselves for believing in the right thing. This is a good thing. I'm sorry that it's been this hard on us, but it's good that we share this collective desire to get our country back, to save our democracy, and to vote for Harrison Wells in the coming election. Thank you for listening.